Catherine Martinez had always been the heart of her family. At 68 years old, she possessed a warmth that could light up any room she entered. Her silver hair was always perfectly styled, and her brown eyes sparkled with mischief and love. She lived in a cozy house on Maple Street with her husband of 45 years, Robert, and their home was the gathering place for their 3 children and 7 grandchildren. Catherine worked as an elementary school teacher for 38 years before retiring. Even after retirement, children from the neighborhood would still knock on her door, seeking help with homework or just wanting to share their day with the woman who had taught half the town how to read. Her kitchen always smelled of fresh cookies, and there was always a pot of coffee ready for unexpected visitors. Robert often joked that Catherine collected people the way others collected stamps. She had friends from every walk of life, from the mailman who delivered their letters to the bank president who handled their savings. She remembered everyone's birthday, knew the names of all her neighbors' pets, and could tell you the favorite color of every child she had ever taught. But Catherine had a secret passion that very few people knew about. Since she was a young girl, she had dreamed of being an artist. She would sketch flowers in the margins of her school books and paint landscapes on scraps of paper she found around the house. When she married Robert and started having children, her art supplies were packed away in boxes and stored in the attic. Life became about raising children, teaching other people's children, and being the perfect wife and mother. Over the years, Catherine would sometimes climb up to the attic and look at her old paintbrushes and canvases. She would hold them in her hands and remember the dreams she once had. But then she would hear one of her children calling for her, or Robert would need help with something, and she would carefully put everything back in the boxes. When Catherine turned 65 and retired from teaching, she finally had time for herself. She quietly set up a small art studio in the spare bedroom. She didn't tell anyone about it at first, not even Robert. She was embarrassed that she was starting so late in life, and she worried that people would think she was being foolish. Every morning after Robert left for his part-time job at the hardware store, Catherine would slip into her little studio. She started with simple drawings, trying to remember techniques she had learned decades ago. Her hands were not as steady as they once were, but her passion burned just as bright. Slowly, she began to paint again. Catherine painted the view from her bedroom window, the old oak tree in their backyard, and portraits of her grandchildren from photographs. She was rusty at first, but with each painting she grew more confident. She began to experiment with colors and styles, finding her own unique voice as an artist. For 3 years, Catherine painted in secret. She created dozens of beautiful works, each one better than the last. She painted sunsets that seemed to glow right off the canvas, portraits that captured the essence of their subjects, and landscapes that made viewers feel like they could step right into the scene. The only person who knew about Catherine's art was Mrs. Henderson, her neighbor and closest friend. Mrs. Henderson had discovered Catherine's secret by accident when she came over early one morning and found Catherine in her studio. Instead of being surprised, Mrs. Henderson was thrilled and became Catherine's biggest supporter. Mrs. Henderson encouraged Catherine to show her work to others, but Catherine was too shy. She was afraid people would criticize her art or think she was too old to be pursuing such dreams. Mrs. Henderson respected Catherine's wishes but often told her that her paintings were good enough to hang in any gallery in the city. As Catherine's 70th birthday approached, her family began planning a surprise party. They wanted to celebrate the woman who had given so much of herself to others throughout her life. Her children secretly contacted all of Catherine's former students, her teaching colleagues, and friends from around town. During this time, Catherine had been working on something special. She had decided to paint a self-portrait, something she had never attempted before. She worked on it every day for 2 months, carefully studying her reflection in an old mirror she had placed in her studio. This painting was different from all her others. It seemed to capture not just her physical appearance, but her soul, her dreams, and her journey through life. Catherine poured all of her emotions into this self-portrait. It showed her wearing her favorite blue dress, the one she had worn to every important family event for the past 10 years. Her hands were folded in her lap, showing the wedding ring she had worn for 45 years. But it was her eyes in the painting that were truly remarkable. They seemed to hold a lifetime of wisdom, love, and quiet strength. Unknown to Catherine, Mrs. Henderson had been documenting Catherine's artistic journey with photographs. She had pictures of Catherine working in her studio, close-ups of her paintings, and even a few videos of Catherine explaining her techniques. Mrs. Henderson had a plan, but she kept it to herself. 3 weeks before Catherine's birthday party, Mrs. Henderson noticed that Catherine seemed different. She moved more slowly, seemed tired more often, and complained of headaches. When Mrs. Henderson suggested that Catherine see a doctor, Catherine brushed off her concern, saying she was just getting older and needed more rest. But Mrs. Henderson was worried. She had known Catherine for over 20 years, and she could tell that something was not right. Catherine's hands shook slightly when she painted, and sometimes she would pause in the middle of a conversation, as if she had forgotten what she was saying. The family was so busy planning the surprise party that they didn't notice these subtle changes in Catherine. Robert attributed her fatigue to the excitement of her upcoming birthday celebration. The children, who lived in different cities, only spoke to their mother on the phone and didn't see the physical changes that Mrs. Henderson observed daily. Catherine continued working on her self-portrait, even as she felt increasingly tired. She was determined to finish it, though she couldn't explain why it felt so important to her. Every brushstroke seemed significant, as if she was painting not just her image but her legacy. 2 weeks before the party, Catherine collapsed while painting in her studio. Mrs. Henderson found her unconscious on the floor, paintbrush still in her hand with wet paint scattered across the canvas and floor. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and Catherine was rushed to the hospital with Robert following behind, his face pale with fear. At the hospital, doctors ran test after test. Catherine drifted in and out of consciousness, and when she was awake, she seemed confused about where she was. The medical team worked quickly, ordering brain scans, blood tests, and consulting with specialists. Robert sat in the waiting room, calling their children and trying to make sense of what was happening. Dr. Sarah Williams, a neurologist with kind eyes and gentle hands, finally came to speak with the family. She sat down across from Robert and their 3 children, who had driven through the night to be at their mother's bedside. The diagnosis was devastating. Catherine had an aggressive brain tumor that had been growing for months, possibly years. The tumor explained everything: the headaches, the fatigue, the confusion, and the tremor in her hands. Dr. Williams explained that the tumor was inoperable due to its location and size. She spoke softly about treatment options, but her expression told them what her words could not. Catherine's time was limited. The family was stunned. Catherine had always been so strong, so full of life. She was the one who took care of everyone else. How could this vibrant woman, who just that morning had been painting in her studio, be dying? Robert held his head in his hands and wept. Their children, Maria, James, and Susan, tried to comfort their father while processing their own grief. When Catherine woke up the next morning, she was clearer than she had been in days. It was as if her mind had found a brief moment of peace amid the storm. Dr. Williams gently explained the situation to her, and Catherine listened with remarkable calm. She asked practical questions about time, about treatment, about what would happen next. After the doctor left, Catherine's family gathered around her hospital bed. She took each of their hands and spoke to them with the same wisdom and love she had always shown. She told Robert how much their marriage had meant to her, how proud she was of the life they had built together. She spoke to each of her children about their unique gifts and reminded them to take care of each other. Then Catherine surprised them all by asking about her paintings. She wanted to know if her studio was okay, if her self-portrait was damaged when she fell. Her family exchanged confused glances. They didn't know about her art, her secret passion that had brought her so much joy in recent years. Mrs. Henderson arrived at the hospital that afternoon with tears in her eyes and a heavy heart. She had brought photos of Catherine's studio and her artwork. When Catherine's family saw the images, they were amazed. The paintings were beautiful, professional quality work that none of them had ever seen before. Catherine smiled weakly as she looked at the photos of her paintings. She pointed to the unfinished self-portrait and whispered to Mrs. Henderson that she wished she could complete it. Mrs. Henderson promised her that somehow, some way, the painting would be finished. The doctors gave Catherine 2 to 4 weeks to live. She chose to spend her remaining time at home, surrounded by the people and things she loved. Hospice nurses came to help care for her, and the house on Maple Street became filled with flowers, visitors, and quiet conversations. During this time, Mrs. Henderson made a difficult decision. She contacted the local art gallery and spoke with the curator, Ms. Patricia Vance. Mrs. Henderson explained Catherine's situation and asked if there was any way to organize a small exhibition of Catherine's work. She wanted Catherine to see her art displayed properly, to know that her talent was recognized and appreciated. Ms. Vance was moved by the story and agreed immediately. She came to see Catherine's studio and was genuinely impressed by the quality of the work. Within a week, she had arranged for a small exhibition at the gallery. Catherine's paintings would be displayed professionally, with proper lighting and beautiful frames. Meanwhile, Catherine's family canceled the surprise birthday party. Instead, they decided to have a quiet gathering at home, where Catherine could see all the people she loved. They invited her former students, teaching colleagues, neighbors, and friends to come say goodbye. As word spread about Catherine's condition, people began sharing stories about how she had touched their lives. Former students sent letters describing how she had inspired them to love learning. Parents wrote about how Catherine had believed in their children when no one else did. Neighbors shared memories of her kindness and generosity. Catherine spent her days in bed or sitting in a comfortable chair by the window, looking out at the oak tree she had painted so many times. She was on medication for pain, but her mind remained clear most of the time. She enjoyed listening to the stories people shared and seemed at peace with her situation. One afternoon, as Catherine dozed by the window, Mrs. Henderson quietly entered her studio with Ms. Vance and 2 art students from the local college. Catherine had given permission for them to finish her self-portrait, using her notes and instructions she had written in a small journal beside her easel. The art students, Sarah and Michael, were honored to work on Catherine's final piece. They studied her style carefully, looking at her other paintings to understand her technique and use of color. They worked slowly and respectfully, adding delicate touches to complete the portrait exactly as Catherine had envisioned it. When the painting was finished, it was even more beautiful than anyone had imagined. Catherine's eyes in the portrait seemed to follow you around the room, and there was something ethereal about the way the light fell across her face. It was clear that this was not just a painting, but a masterpiece created with love and completed with honor. The gallery exhibition was set for the following Saturday, just 5 days away. Ms. Vance and her team worked around the clock to prepare Catherine's paintings for display. They carefully cleaned and framed each piece, arranging them in a way that told the story of Catherine's artistic journey. As Catherine's condition grew worse, her family worried that she might not be strong enough to attend her own art exhibition, but Catherine was determined to see her work displayed. It had been her secret dream for so many years, and now it was finally coming true. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine streaming through Catherine's bedroom windows. She had slept poorly, but her spirits were high because this was the day she would finally see her artwork displayed in a real gallery. Robert helped her choose a dress, the same blue one from her self-portrait, and Mrs. Henderson arrived early to help with her hair and makeup. Catherine moved slowly, but she insisted on walking into the gallery on her own feet. She wanted to experience this moment with dignity and grace. The short car ride to downtown felt like a journey to another world. Catherine pressed her face to the window, watching the familiar streets of her town pass by, knowing this might be one of the last times she would see them. The Riverside Gallery was a beautiful old building with large windows and polished wooden floors. Ms. Vance had decorated the space with soft lighting and fresh flowers, creating an atmosphere that felt both elegant and welcoming. A small sign by the entrance read, "Catherine Martinez, A Life in Color, an exhibition of recently discovered works." When Catherine arrived, there were already several people waiting outside the gallery. Word had spread throughout the community about the exhibition, and many people wanted to support Catherine and see the artwork that had been created in secret for so many years. Catherine was overwhelmed by the turnout and touched that so many people cared about her work. Ms. Vance greeted Catherine at the entrance and personally escorted her through the gallery. Catherine gasped when she saw her paintings hanging on, the walls each one professionally lit and beautifully framed. She had only ever seen them in her small studio, and now they looked like they belonged in a museum. The first painting Catherine saw was one of her earliest works, a simple landscape of the park near her home. Even though she considered it amateur, compared to her later work, it looked stunning in its golden frame. Catherine smiled as she remembered the morning she had painted it, how nervous she had been to even hold a paintbrush again after so many years. As they walked through the gallery, Catherine saw people studying her paintings with genuine interest and appreciation. She heard visitors commenting on her use of color, her attention to detail, and the emotion captured in each piece. One woman stood for several minutes in front of Catherine's painting of children playing in a schoolyard, tears streaming down her face. Robert walked beside Catherine, his arm supporting her when she needed it. He was amazed by his wife's talent and felt guilty that he had never known about her passion for art. He made mental notes of which paintings were her favorites, wanting to remember everything about this special day. Catherine's children followed close behind, equally amazed by their mother's hidden talent. Maria, an elementary school principal herself, was particularly drawn to Catherine's portraits of children. James, an engineer, admired the technical skill in her architectural paintings of local buildings. Susan, a nurse, was moved by the gentleness and compassion visible in every brushstroke. About halfway through the gallery, Catherine came to a painting that made her stop completely. It was a portrait she had painted of Robert, working in their garden. She had painted it from memory, capturing him as he looked on a summer evening, his sleeves rolled up and a content expression on his face. Robert stood beside her, looking at his own painted image with wonder. The gallery was filling up with more visitors. Former students arrived with their own children, pointing out their beloved teacher to the next generation. Teaching colleagues came to pay their respects and marvel at Catherine's artistic abilities. Neighbors and friends moved through the space, quietly, sharing whispered stories about Catherine's kindness over the years. Mrs. Henderson stayed close to Catherine, watching for signs of fatigue. She could see that Catherine was getting tired, but also that this experience was filling her with joy. Catherine moved from painting to painting like she was visiting old friends, remembering the day she created each one and the emotions she had tried to capture. Near the back of the gallery, Ms. Vance had created a special display about Catherine's life. There were photos of her teaching career, images of her with her family, and a timeline showing how her artistic style had developed over the past 3 years. Visitors could see the progression from tentative early works to confident, masterful paintings. Catherine was particularly touched by a guest book that Ms. Vance had placed near the entrance. People were writing messages about her art and sharing memories of how she had impacted their lives. One former student wrote, "Mrs. Martinez taught me to read, but her paintings teach me to see." Another visitor wrote, "These paintings show the heart of someone who has lived with love and purpose." As the afternoon progressed, Catherine found herself in conversations with people she hadn't seen in years. They talked about her art, but also about shared memories, funny classroom stories, and the ways she had influenced their lives. Catherine realized that this gallery exhibition had become much more than just an art show. It was a celebration of her entire life. The most emotional moment came when Catherine encountered Tommy Rodriguez, a former student who was now 35 years old. Tommy had struggled with reading as a child, and Catherine had spent countless extra hours helping him. He stood in front of her painting of a young boy reading under a tree, and told Catherine how her patience and belief in him had changed his entire life. He was now a successful lawyer and had named his daughter Catherine in her honor. Throughout the day, Catherine noticed people taking photos of her paintings and asking Ms. Vance about purchasing them. Several pieces had small red dots next to them, indicating they had been sold. Catherine was amazed that people valued her work enough to want to hang it in their own homes. As the afternoon grew late, Ms. Vance approached Catherine and whispered that there was one more surprise. She led Catherine to a separate room at the back of the gallery that had been closed off with a curtain. Catherine's family gathered around as Ms. Vance slowly pulled back the curtain to reveal the final display. In the center of the room, lit by a single spotlight, hung Catherine's completed self-portrait. It was magnificent, more beautiful than Catherine had ever imagined it could be. The painting seemed to glow with inner light, and Catherine's painted eyes looked directly at anyone who entered the room. Below the portrait was a small plaque that read, "Self-Portrait by Catherine Martinez, completed posthumously with love and respect by Sarah Chen and Michael Torres, students at Riverside Community College, under the guidance of the artist's detailed notes and vision." Catherine stood perfectly still, staring at her completed self-portrait. The room fell completely silent as everyone present seemed to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary. The painting captured not just Catherine's physical appearance, but something deeper. Her soul, her wisdom, her journey through life, and her dreams finally realized. Tears began flowing down Catherine's cheeks, but they were tears of joy and fulfillment rather than sadness. For 70 years she had carried the dream of being a real artist, of seeing her work displayed and appreciated. Now in the final weeks of her life, that dream had come true in ways she never could have imagined. Robert moved to stand beside his wife, his own eyes filled with tears. He gently took her hand and whispered how proud he was of her, how sorry he was that he hadn't known about her passion, and how beautiful her artwork was. Catherine squeezed his hand and told him that keeping her art secret had actually made it more special. It was something that belonged entirely to her during a time when everything else in her life belonged to others. The art students who had completed the portrait, Sarah and Michael, were also in the room. They approached Catherine nervously, worried about how she would react to seeing their work on her painting. Catherine looked at them with such gratitude and warmth that they immediately felt at ease. She thanked them for understanding her vision and for helping her finish what she couldn't complete herself. Catherine spent several more minutes studying every detail of her self-portrait. She could see where her own brushstrokes ended and where the students' work began, but the transition was seamless. They had captured her style perfectly and completed the painting exactly as she had envisioned it. The blue dress looked rich and vibrant. Her hands appeared gentle and wise, and her eyes held a depth that seemed to contain a lifetime of experiences. Miss Vance explained that several collectors and gallery owners from the city had come to see Catherine's work after hearing about the exhibition. They were amazed by her talent and wanted to know if there were more paintings. Some had asked about organizing a larger exhibition, possibly even a traveling show that could visit other galleries. Catherine was overwhelmed by this news. She had never imagined that her work would be considered worthy of such attention. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward and explained that Catherine had created over 40 paintings in the past 3 years, and that there were sketches and drawings dating back to her childhood stored in boxes in the attic. As word spread that Catherine was the artist and that she was present at the gallery, more people began arriving. Local news reporter Janet Hawkins heard about the story and came with a photographer. She spoke with Catherine about her late discovery of her artistic talent and the exhibition of her work. Catherine was initially shy about the interview, but she became more comfortable as she talked about her love of painting and her gratitude for finally being able to share her art with others. The interview was brief because Catherine was getting tired, but she managed to share some important thoughts. She talked about how it's never too late to pursue your dreams, how art had given her a way to express feelings she couldn't put into words, and how grateful she was for the people who had supported her journey. Her words were soft but powerful, and everyone in the room was moved by her grace and wisdom. As the day began to wind down, Catherine made one final walk through the gallery, saying goodbye to each of her paintings. She paused at her painting of the old oak tree in her backyard, remembering how many hours she had spent perfecting the way the sunlight filtered through its leaves. She smiled at her portrait of her youngest granddaughter, Emma, captured in a moment of concentration as she read a book. Catherine's family began making preparations to take her home. The day had been magical, but they could see she was exhausted. However, Catherine insisted on staying until the gallery officially closed. She wanted to talk to every person who came to see her work and thank them for caring about her art. During the final hour of the exhibition, something beautiful happened. People began sharing not just their thoughts about Catherine's paintings, but stories about how Catherine had touched their lives over the years. The gallery became filled with laughter and tears as former students, fellow teachers, neighbors, and friends remembered moments of kindness, encouragement, and love. One elderly man named Frank revealed that Catherine had taught both him and his daughter to read, 30 years apart. A young mother shared how Catherine had encouraged her to become a teacher, inspiring her to follow in Catherine's footsteps. The mail carrier, Pete, talked about how Catherine always had a kind word and a glass of iced tea ready for him on hot summer days. As these stories were shared, Catherine realized that her life had been like a painting in itself. Each person she had taught, each life she had touched, each moment of kindness she had shown, they were all brushstrokes that had created something beautiful and lasting. Her artwork was wonderful, but her life's work was even more magnificent. When the gallery finally closed at 6 o'clock, Catherine took one last look around the space. The walls that had held her paintings seemed to glow in the evening light, and she could hardly believe that her secret dream had become such a beautiful reality. She thanked Ms. Vance repeatedly for making the exhibition possible and for treating her work with such respect and professionalism. On the drive home, Catherine was quiet but peaceful. She looked out the window at the familiar streets of her town, seeing them with new eyes. Everything looked different now that she had finally shared her artistic vision with the world. She felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. Back at home, Catherine was exhausted but exhilarated. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, still wearing her blue dress from the portrait, and asked Mrs. Henderson to bring her the guest book from the gallery. She wanted to read every comment and message that people had written about her work. Robert prepared a light dinner, but Catherine was more interested in looking through the gallery's catalog that Ms. Vance had given her. Each of her paintings was photographed beautifully, with detailed information about the techniques she had used and the inspiration behind each piece. It looked like a real artist's catalog, professional and elegant. As evening fell, Catherine's children gathered around her chair to look through the catalog together. They asked her about each painting, wanting to understand the stories behind the images their mother had created. Catherine shared her memories and explained her artistic choices, enjoying this opportunity to finally talk openly about her passion with the people she loved most. The weeks following the gallery exhibition were bittersweet. Catherine's health declined rapidly, but her spirits remained high because of the overwhelming response to her artwork. The local newspaper published a full-page article about her exhibition, complete with color photographs of several paintings and quotes from visitors who had been moved by her work. Catherine received dozens of letters from people who had attended the exhibition. Many were from former students who shared memories of her teaching and expressed amazement at discovering her artistic talent. Others were from art lovers in the community who had been touched by her paintings and wanted to tell her how much her work meant to them. One letter particularly moved Catherine. It came from Dr. Williams, the neurologist who had diagnosed her condition. Dr. Williams wrote that she had visited the exhibition during her lunch break and had been deeply affected by Catherine's self-portrait. She said that seeing the painting had reminded her why she became a doctor, to help people live meaningful lives. Regardless of how much time they had left, Mrs. Henderson became Catherine's connection to the outside world as her mobility decreased. She brought news about the exhibition, which had been extended for another week due to popular demand. Several of Catherine's paintings had sold to collectors who wanted to preserve her work, and Ms. Vance was in discussions with a gallery in the state capital about organizing a posthumous exhibition. During this time, Catherine worked on something new. Despite her weakening condition, she insisted on writing letters to each of her grandchildren. These weren't ordinary letters. They were artistic instruction manuals teaching each grandchild basic painting techniques and encouraging them to explore their own creativity. Catherine included small sketches in each letter, demonstrating brushstrokes and color mixing. 10-year-old Emma, Catherine's youngest granddaughter, was particularly inspired by her grandmother's letters. She had always loved to draw, but seeing Catherine's professional artwork gave her confidence to try painting with real brushes and oils. Catherine's daughter Maria brought Emma to visit every few days, and Catherine would spend whatever energy she had teaching Emma basic techniques. During one of these visits, Emma created a small painting of flowers under Catherine's gentle guidance. Catherine's hands were too shaky to paint herself, but she could still offer advice about color choices and brush pressure. When Emma finished her painting, Catherine smiled and told her it was beautiful. Emma carefully signed her name in the corner, just like her grandmother had taught her. Catherine also spent time organizing her artistic legacy with Mrs. Henderson's help. They created a detailed inventory of all her paintings, sketches, and drawings, including the ones stored in the attic from her youth. Catherine wrote notes about each piece, explaining when and why she had created it, what techniques she had used, and what the artwork meant to her. This process revealed the true scope of Catherine's artistic output. Including her early sketches and recent paintings, she had created over 200 pieces of art throughout her lifetime. Some were simple pencil drawings from her school days, while others were sophisticated oil paintings that demonstrated real mastery of the medium. Catherine made decisions about where each painting should go after her death. She wanted her self-portrait to remain at the gallery permanently, as an inspiration for other late-blooming artists. Several pieces would go to her children and grandchildren, creating a lasting connection between the family and Catherine's artistic spirit. A few paintings would be donated to the elementary school where she had taught, to inspire future generations of students. As Catherine's condition worsened, her family took shifts staying with her. Robert rarely left her side, sleeping in a chair next to her bed and waking frequently to check on her. Their children visited daily, often bringing their own children to spend time with their beloved grandmother. During these final days, Catherine's art studio became a place of pilgrimage for the family. They would sit quietly among her paintings, feeling close to the creative spirit that had driven her in her final years. The unfinished canvases on her easel served as reminders of dreams that would remain incomplete, but also of the incredible journey Catherine had taken as an artist. Mrs. Henderson organized a small gathering for Catherine's closest friends and neighbors. They came to say goodbye and to share their favorite memories. Catherine was too weak to participate much in the conversation, but she smiled as she listened to stories about her kindness, her teaching, and her impact on the community. The art students, Sarah and Michael, who had completed Catherine's self-portrait, visited to show her a photo essay they had created about her artistic process. They had documented their work on her painting with detailed photographs, showing how they had studied her techniques and completed the portrait according to her vision. Catherine was deeply moved by their dedication and skill. During this visit, Sarah mentioned that she was changing her major from business to art education because of her experience working on Catherine's painting. She said that seeing Catherine's passion for art, even in her final weeks, had inspired her to pursue a career teaching art to children. Catherine's eyes filled with tears of joy knowing that her love of art would continue through another generation. One evening, as Catherine lay in bed looking out at her beloved oak tree, she asked Robert to bring her a small sketch pad and pencil. Despite her weakness, she managed to draw one final picture, a simple but beautiful image of two hands holding each other. She signed it with a shaky signature and gave it to Robert, telling him it represented their 45 years of marriage and their promise to love each other forever. This final drawing became precious to Robert, who kept it on his nightstand. It was simple compared to Catherine's elaborate paintings, but it captured something essential about love, commitment, and the beauty of human connection. The hands in the drawing were clearly recognizable as Catherine's and Robert's, worn by years of work but still strong in their connection to each other. Catherine's breathing became more labored, and Dr. Williams increased her medication to keep her comfortable. The family gathered around her bed, taking turns holding her hand and telling her how much she meant to them. Catherine drifted in and out of consciousness, but when she was awake, she seemed peaceful and unafraid. On her final day, Catherine surprised everyone by asking to see one more painting. Mrs. Henderson brought her landscape painting of the local park, the first piece she had completed after returning to art. Catherine studied it carefully, remembering the fear and excitement she had felt when picking up a paintbrush after decades away from art. Looking at that first painting, Catherine realized how far she had traveled in just 3 years. She had gone from a nervous beginner afraid to show anyone her work, to a recognized artist whose paintings would outlive her and inspire others. It was a remarkable journey for someone who had thought her artistic dreams were permanently buried in boxes in the attic. Catherine Martinez passed away peacefully on a Tuesday morning in early spring, surrounded by her loving family. The sun was shining through her bedroom window, casting the same warm light across her face that she had captured in so many of her paintings. Her final moments were gentle, and Robert held her hand as she took her last breath, just as he had held it on their wedding day 45 years earlier. The funeral service was held at St. Mary's Church, where Catherine and Robert had been married and where their children had been baptized. The church was filled to capacity with people whose lives Catherine had touched as a teacher, neighbor, friend, and artist. The service was beautiful but simple, focusing on Catherine's life of service and her recent emergence as an accomplished artist. Ms. Vance from the gallery spoke about Catherine's artistic legacy, describing how her work would continue to inspire people for generations to come. Mrs. Henderson shared stories about Catherine's secret artistic journey and her joy at finally seeing her work displayed professionally. Several former students spoke about how Catherine had changed their lives through her teaching and her belief in their potential. The most moving moment came when Emma, Catherine's 10-year-old granddaughter, approached the podium carrying the small flower painting she had created under Catherine's guidance. In a clear, brave voice, Emma told the congregation that her grandmother had taught her that it's never too late to follow your dreams, and that art is a way to share love with the world. After the service, the family gathered at Catherine's home for a reception. The house felt different without her presence, but it was still filled with the warmth and love she had created over decades of living there. Guests moved through the rooms, sharing memories and looking at the paintings Catherine had kept for herself, the ones that were too personal or meaningful to include in the gallery exhibition. Robert had decided to keep Catherine's art studio exactly as she had left it. Her easel still held an unfinished painting of the view from their bedroom window, and her paintbrushes were arranged neatly in glass jars, waiting for an artist who would never return. The space felt sacred, a monument to dreams fulfilled and creativity unleashed. In the weeks following Catherine's death, her artistic legacy began to grow. The exhibition at the Riverside Gallery became permanent, with Catherine's self-portrait serving as the centerpiece of a display about local artists. The gallery created educational programs based on Catherine's story, encouraging older adults to explore their creative potential regardless of their age. Several of Catherine's paintings were loaned to the State Art Museum for a special exhibition called Hidden Talents Art, discovered late in life. Catherine's work was featured alongside paintings by other artists who had started their careers after retirement. The exhibition traveled to 6 cities and inspired thousands of people to pick up paintbrushes for the first time, or return to artistic pursuits they had abandoned years earlier. Emma continued painting, carrying forward her grandmother's artistic spirit. She created a series of paintings showing different seasons in Catherine's garden, working from photographs and her own memories of time spent there with her grandmother. These paintings hung in her bedroom, daily reminders of the special bond she had shared with Catherine and the creative gifts that had been passed down to her. The elementary school where Catherine had taught for 38 years established the Catherine Martinez Art Fund, which provided supplies and instruction for students who showed artistic interest, but whose families couldn't afford art materials. The fund was supported by sales of prints of Catherine's paintings, ensuring that her passion for both teaching and art would continue to benefit children. Mrs. Henderson became the unofficial keeper of Catherine's artistic memory. She organized an annual art fair in Catherine's honor, where local artists of all ages could display their work. The fair quickly became a beloved community tradition, celebrating not just artistic achievement but the courage to pursue creative dreams at any stage of life. Robert struggled with grief, but found comfort and surrounded himself with Catherine's artwork. He learned about proper lighting and humidity control to preserve the paintings, and he enjoyed explaining Catherine's techniques to visitors who came to see her work. He often sat in her studio in the evenings, feeling close to the woman he had loved for nearly 5 decades. 6 months after Catherine's death, Robert received a call from a publisher in New York who wanted to create a book about Catherine's life and art. The publisher had heard about Catherine's story through the traveling exhibition and believed it would inspire readers across the country. Robert agreed to the project, working with the publisher to select paintings and share stories about Catherine's life. The book, titled Catherine's Canvas: A Life Painted with Love, was published the following year. It included full-color reproductions of 40 of Catherine's best paintings, along with the story of her artistic journey and insights about finding creativity later in life. The book became a bestseller in the art and inspiration categories, reaching readers who had never heard of Catherine but were moved by her story. Art schools began using Catherine's story in their curricula, teaching students that artistic expression is valuable, regardless of when it begins or how long it lasts. Her self-portrait became an iconic image representing the power of pursuing dreams despite age, circumstances, or obstacles. Prints of the painting hung in classrooms, retirement centers, and art studios around the world. 5 years after Catherine's death, the town declared an annual Catherine Martinez Day, celebrating arts education and lifelong learning. The day featured art classes for seniors, exhibitions by student artists, and storytelling sessions where community members shared how Catherine had influenced their lives. The celebration grew each year, attracting visitors from neighboring towns who came to learn about the teacher who became an artist. Emma, now 15 and an accomplished young artist herself, gave the keynote speech at the 5th annual Catherine Martinez Day. She stood before a crowd of hundreds, including her grandfather Robert and Mrs. Henderson, and spoke about how her grandmother's courage to pursue art late in life had inspired an entire community to value creativity and never give up on their dreams. Emma concluded her speech by unveiling a new painting she had created, a portrait of Catherine working in her studio, paintbrush in hand and surrounded by the canvases that had brought her so much joy. The painting captured not just Catherine's physical appearance, but the spirit of determination and creativity that had defined her final years. As the applause died down and people gathered to look at Emma's tribute painting, Mrs. Henderson wiped tears from her eyes and thought about how Catherine's artistic legacy had grown far beyond anything they could have imagined. Catherine had started painting in secret, afraid that people would think she was foolish for pursuing art so late in life. Instead, her courage had inspired thousands of people to embrace their own creative dreams. The room fell silent as people studied Emma's painting of her grandmother. In that moment, everyone present understood that they were witnessing something profound, the continuation of an artistic spirit that had touched countless lives and would continue to inspire future generations. Catherine's final portrait may have been revealed years earlier, but her true masterpiece was the legacy of love, creativity, and courage that would live on forever in the hearts and minds of all who had known her story.